Welcome to the Kriya Yoga Podcast, a source of inspiration and actionable education for those inspired towards the goal of enlightenment through yogic meditation. Through these interviews, discussions, and reflections, it is my intention to share the possibility of waking up to the reality of self and God realization, and to remind you of the immortal words of Paramahansa Yogananda. Don't look back. Don't look to the left or to the right. Look straight ahead to the goal and go all the way in this lifetime. I'm Ryan Kurczak, and I'll be your host on this adventure of spiritual self-discovery. I recently received a message from someone whom I've known since before I attended high school. The message was interesting because I didn't really expect it, and I'll read it to you. He wrote, "I hope there is a path to enlightenment in the world beyond. It seems like in the attitude of your community, some people get lost in the afterlife struggle. How focused do we actually have to be? I'd like to know what you actually believe if you have a 3-hour interview opportunity." I was surprised by that question, but I also took some time to reflect on what was being asked, and that's not something that can really be answered in a 3-hour interview. And what I responded was, I said, we have to be focused on the things that result in what we want to experience and disregard those things that result in other experiences. And as far as the explanation in 3 hours, I told him that I wouldn't have taken the time to create the 3 to 4 year courses of study that result in a direct experience of this knowledge, of this information. And I wanted to share this in our discussion today for a few reasons. Number one, I think that sometimes yogis get confused about what is required of them to experience the results of yoga. So we're going to discuss that. And secondly, we also sometimes become impatient, or again, we're just confused about how long it actually takes for realization to dawn. And let's go back to that first section of the response that I gave. I said that we have to be focused on the things that result in what we want to experience and disregard those that result in other experiences. And that's common sense, that's a fact of life, but for some reason in spiritual situations, spiritual communities, that point is often overlooked or sometimes missed. So what is one of the key necessities that allow the process of yoga to work? Well, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the opening statement, or the opening statements, are a now instruction in yoga, and there's a definition of yoga, that yoga is the stilling or the ceasing of identification with the mind, with the changes and fluctuations in the field of consciousness. That's one way you could look at it. That's not so precise, but you get the idea. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. This is saying that yoga is the ending of the fluctuations and changes within the field of consciousness. That's probably a more accurate way to put it. The field of consciousness. Because we have the field of consciousness, which is everything that can be experienced, which is always changing, cycling through, revolving, rotating. But then there is the seer, or the Purusha, which is the unchanging, indescribable, eternal witness. And as we progress through our yoga practice, we eventually shift our attention from the fluctuations, the ever-changing nature of this ephemeral reality, and we're able to be, exist as, appreciate our eternal, infinite, timeless nature as the self, as Purusha. And you could use the word spirit, that'll get the job done, but it's not, again, quite accurate. That's the difficulty using Sanskrit ideas and terms. And so what is required for that to happen? Well, you have to be able to concentrate and to focus, developing a capacity to concentrate and to focus. Because many people, their experience of life is just constant change, fluctuation, uncertainty. And there is no sense of focus. The mind just jumps from one thing to the next. And so life can feel scattered and confused. Now, in the process of yoga, what we're learning to do is to concentrate our focus. And in that concentration, what happens is all of these changes and fluctuations become less impactful on our experience. And so one of the most essential skills that we develop as a yogi is the capacity to focus. And anyone who's been successful in any area of life, aside from just getting lucky, knows that the reason they were successful is because they focused on what they wanted to succeed at. And they minimized those things which pulled their focus away. To have a successful business, you have to sacrifice your time and your energy and many other things to put your focus on your business. To become a skilled musician, you have to sacrifice your time. You have to sacrifice many other things that you could be doing so that you can focus on becoming better at your musical instrument. Again, this applies to anything in life. And the same is true for spirituality. In order to benefit from and grasp what is available to you in the sense of experience and also revealed wisdom, you have to focus on those things which support that process, and you have to choose to let go of those things which pull you away from it. Now, we're not going to take time to go through lists of things that pull you away from your spiritual path. You can just pay attention, and that'll give you the insights you need. You can pay attention to what you give your attention to, and you can notice, do those things that you give your attention to, do they support your practice? Do they support your understanding? Do they support your goal to grow spiritually? Just pay attention to what the results of your actions are. Turn your life into a self-reflective mode and observe, does this assist me in greater clarity and spiritual awareness, greater wisdom, greater poise? Or does this make me restless? Does this make me tired? Does this make me frustrated? Does this prevent me from being able to sit still and to turn my awareness within? Just pay attention. And the more you pay attention, you start to generate this energy, which we've talked about before in the podcast, or this quality of the field of consciousness called sattva, which is light and illumination and clarity. And as you pay attention and this light, illumination, and clarity grows, you start to find that you're guided from within. Now, are you guided from within? Yes, you're always guided from within. The trouble is we don't often pay attention to that inner guidance. And the first step in paying attention to that inner guidance is simply to observe, to notice the results of your actions, and to give your attention to those actions which support your goals, support your intentions. Now that, of course, is going to require that you have the courage and the inner autonomy to make those choices and to feel confident about those choices. But that's something you work out as you go, as you become stronger, as you become more psychologically, mentally, and emotionally mature and healthy. Again, back to this statement that I made. We have to be focused on the things that result in what we want to experience and disregard those that result in other experiences. This can be a lifelong process. It should take maybe a few years. If you drag it on too long, then it just becomes a habit of confusion, of wondering, well, should I choose that? Should I choose this? It's okay in the beginning to not be sure, to not necessarily have the experience just yet to recognize, oh, when I spend time doing this, I can't focus very well. When I ingest these things, I'm not quite as healthy as I should be. When I don't get enough rest, I end up fighting to stay awake while I'm meditating, and so on. In the beginning, it is a little difficult to figure those things out because we have been alive for a while and we have certain habits that we have to become aware of. And sometimes shifting and changing those habits can be difficult, but it is part of the process. And this isn't just physical habits, or it isn't just habits of activity. It's also habits of the mind. One of the troubles that a lot of people experience is that when they come to a spiritual path, what they're really trying to do is to validate what they think is real, how they think it should be, rather than learning, well, what is it really? And again, this is okay in the beginning because we need to have some kind of inspiration, some kind of goal to be shooting for. But we have to be open to change. We have to be open to realizing that even though I have this initial inspiration and I think that this is what it's going to mean to be spiritually awake and clear and enlightened and full of wisdom, we have to admit that, well, clearly if I knew what it was, I'd have that. And I don't. So I'm going to be open to seeing what is it really like while riding this initial enthusiasm, these initial ideas into the reality of the experience. And you've probably seen that in several different areas of your life, where you've had an idea of how things were going to be, and that helped motivate you to go in that direction. But then once you got there, you realized, oh, it's really not like that at all. It's good, it's fine, I appreciate it, but I didn't quite have a clear picture of what was required, or I didn't have a clear picture of what it was going to fully be like once I finally achieved this goal. And then once you get there, you do see it. So we have to ride our initial motivations, our initial enthusiasms, but be open to different ways of understanding, of seeing things in a different light, of growing into the reality of the experience. And this reminds me of the story from Autobiography of a Yogi. I believe it was when Yogananda went to see the Sleepless Saint. And when the Sleepless Saint is talking to Yogananda, he expresses his own doubts about his worthiness of spiritual realization. And it goes like this. And this is a quote from the public domain version of Autobiography of a Yogi. Yogananda asks the Sleepless Saint, "Sir, why don't you grant me samadhi? Why don't you grant me oneness, the divine experience?" And so the Sleepless Saint replies, "Dear one, I would be glad to convey the divine contact, but it is not my place to do so." The saint looked at me with half-closed eyes. "Your master will bestow that experience shortly. Your body is not tuned just yet. As a small lamp cannot withstand excessive electrical voltage, so your nerves are unready for the cosmic current. If I gave you the infinite ecstasy right now, you would burn as if every cell were on fire. You are asking illumination from me," the yogi continued musingly, "while I am wondering, inconsiderable as I am, and with the little meditation I have done, if I have succeeded in pleasing God, and what worth I may find in His eyes at the final reckoning." And Yogananda asks, "Sir, have you not been single-heartedly seeking God for a long time?" And that's a valid question. Here we have someone who clearly has illumination, and they themselves have this doubt within them. And the Sleepless Saint replies, "I have not done much. Bihari must have told you something of my life. For 20 years I occupied a secret grotto, meditating 18 hours a day. Then I moved to a more accessible cave and remained there for 25 years, entering the yoga union for 20 hours daily. I did not sleep, for I was ever with God. My body was more rested in the complete calmness of the superconsciousness than it could be by the partial peace of the ordinary subconscious state." And Yogananda says, "My goodness, you have meditated for so long and yet are unsure of the Lord's favor. I gazed at him in astonishment. Yogananda says, "Then what about us poor mortals?" And the Sleepless Saint replies, "Well, don't you see, my boy, that God is eternity itself? To assume one can fully know him by 45 years of meditation is rather a preposterous expectation. Babaji assures us, however, that even a little meditation saves one from the dire fear of death and after-death states. Do not fix your spiritual ideal on a small mountain, but hitch it to the star of unqualified divine attainment. If you work hard, you will get there." So this brings me to the second point. The first point, again, is that we have to focus on what we want to experience. And here in this example, we see a yogi who committed most of his life to understanding this eternity of God, this eternity of the divine. So it's very clear that this yogi was being very intentional about what it is his life was about. And it is a bit extreme, although again, if you want to know God in eternity, it really doesn't seem very extreme at all. 45 years isn't much, as he said. And we do know that most people really can't do that. They don't have the capacity to do that in an intelligent and a healthy way without being fanatical or just harming themselves. But the Sleepless Saint reminds us that that isn't necessary, because he says that Babaji assures us, however, that even a little meditation saves one from the dire fear of death and after-death states. So that's good to know, because I don't want you to go away from this discussion and think that you need to be meditating for 18 hours every day. If that's important to you, you can work up to it, but that's the thing. You have to work up to it. You're still going to have activities you have to engage in your life. You're still going to have duties with family and friends in the culture you live in, and you'll have to work through those things while you develop the capacity to meditate for longer. But as he said early on, let's go back to that. He says to Yogananda, "Your body is not tuned just yet. As a small lamp cannot withstand excessive electrical voltage, so your nerves are unready for the cosmic current. If I gave you the infinite ecstasy right now, you would burn as if every cell were on fire." So we go back to that so that you recognize that, yes, if you feel a strong drive to direct all of your life experience towards the realization of the divine, that's fine. But that you can't move too fast. That you have to tune your body, you have to tune your life to make that possible. For example, when I first found yoga and meditation, it was right after college. Actually, it was towards the end of college. And once I discovered it, it was, and still is, one of the most important things within my life. And I immediately began meditating for as long as I could. I began studying the appropriate literature to understand what the process was like. I found a teacher, my Kriya Yoga teacher, Roy Eugene Davis, who's a student of Paramahansa Yogananda, and I began attending retreats with that teacher and applying what the teacher said and continuously reading and studying his books. And when I would read, for example, Autobiography of a Yogi, and I would hear about someone meditating for 18 hours a day, I would think, well, clearly I'm not doing enough, and I would force it. I would try to sit for longer than I actually could, and I would end up causing myself problems. And one thing that my teacher told me, he said I needed to get more rest. I needed to rest more so that my body could actually handle the experience. And so I had to start finding ways to live my life that I would meditate well, I would study well, but I would know when it was enough, when I needed to take time to rest or go for a walk and so on, to reset my nervous system, but also just in the realities of life. I was barely 20 years old, and I had a lot of living left to do. I had a lot of things that I had to experience and realize. And so I had to balance social time with time working, with time with family, and so on. I had to balance that. And as the years went by, what happened was, where I was 20 years old into my 20s and 30s, and I was a bit more social engage in other activities, other hobbies as well, despite the fact that I was absolutely focused on the spiritual and meditative path. I gave myself the capacity, the chance to live, and yet I kept practicing. And as time went on, within 2 decades or so, the other things within my life became less impactful for me. The need to be social, the need to do all these different things, it just naturally fell away as the intensity of my own practice became stronger. And so now I have no problem sitting for extended periods of meditation. I don't have a whole lot of distractions from social obligations or other things. And that's because over, again, those 2 decades, a little more than 2 decades, life eventually began to sculpt itself such that more and more time could be devoted towards this inner realization. And then the energy was there to give to it. And then there was also the capacity of the body, of the mind, and so on, of the consciousness, the field of consciousness, so that it could handle a stronger current. And again, I'm speaking of this phrase from Autobiography of a Yogi, where the Sleepless Saint says, "As a small lamp cannot withstand excessive voltage, so your nerves are unready for the cosmic current. If I gave you the infinite ecstasy right now, you would burn as if every cell were on fire." And so we have to work to it, and it's a natural process. As human beings, we're born into this world with a certain set of things that we need to experience, certain karmas that are going to flow through our awareness. But the great thing is once we become a human being, then we have choice. And maybe what I should say, once we become a conscious human being, then we have choice. We can start deciding to put more attention towards our spiritual life, towards our inner wisdom, our inner realization. And life eventually flows in that way, and it becomes an expression of divinity, much like we read about the saints within Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi, and it becomes natural for us to be like them. But we have to become conscious first. We have to become aware. We have to become intentional. We have to become focused. And then we have to, without force or strain, guide our life in that direction. And that means that we're probably going to have to let go of many things that we think are important. Many things that our 18-year-old self thought was important, that our 25-year-old self thought was important, that our 30-year-old self thought was important, and so on. There are different stages within our life, and there are different things that are important in these different times. But to kind of grasp this field of eternity, we are going to have to, bit by bit, let all of these things go. And that's the natural part of the spiritual process. As a Vedic astrologer, Vedic astrology deals a lot with looking into a person's karmic situation. And being a yogi, which means we're working to exhaust our storehouse of karma. But what's interesting about that is if you reflect on your life, we go through some specific phases. And the first phase is a child. This is an unconscious phase. And in that unconscious phase, what we're doing is we are directly experiencing the results of all of our previous karma, or the culmination of the seeds of all of our previous karma. It's unconscious. That's why when we come into this world and we have certain experiences with family members, with people, with society, and then, many years later when we're in therapy and we're looking back and we're reflecting on all these things, as a child, we really didn't have any conscious awareness of what was going on. We were just unconsciously experiencing the seeds of our own karma. And this is why it's not always helpful to blame our families and so on for the problems that we had in childhood, because we would not have had those problems. We would not have been born to those family members, to that society, if theoretically, again, we're using a theory, a model of reincarnation here, if we did not already have the capacity to experience those things. And why do we experience them? Who knows? Who knows what we, again, theoretically did in past lives using this model. But it's going to show up in those first 7 years of life. And then, of course, we're going to have to reflect upon them and heal them in our own way, usually through therapy or counseling. And then once we become a teenager, well, we become kind of conscious. Most teenagers are still at the whims of their impulses. But what are we becoming aware of really in those teenage years? As we observe the experiences with our family and so on, we're becoming aware of our ancestral karma, which is broader, more general. Then hopefully, eventually, we become a conscious adult. And by conscious, I mean an aware adult. And by aware, I mean we recognize that we can choose other ways of being. We can think about things in different ways. We can heal our past. We can shift our understanding of where we came from. And we can shift our reaction to the karmas that we brought in. And many people don't make it to that stage. But most yogis tend to, at least at some point. And so as we're looking at our karma, we can recognize, if we look at the first 7 years, our experiences in those first 7 years are going to be related to a culmination of our previous behaviors, good or bad. And yeah, we can blame the people around us, but the people around us are just really serving as an outlet to reveal that experience. You would have felt it anyway. And then as you become a teenager, you move into the teenage years, young adult years, the impulses are still driving you, and you become aware of maybe the strengths and the weaknesses of your family, your mother, your father, the people who raised you, or your culture. Well, you're becoming aware of your cultural karma. And then, of course, once you become a young adult and you start to wake up a little bit, you start to see, oh, I've been on autopilot this whole time in one way or another. Then you can start making other choices. Then you can start putting your awareness on what you want to experience. Again, back to that phrase that we started out with. You have to be focused on the things that result in what you want to experience and disregard those that result in other experiences. So just generally, and as an oversimplification, clearly, you can look at your childhood experiences and your teenage experiences and say, all right, well, this was the momentum, the tidal wave-like expression of the karma washing over my awareness. And I was unconscious of it, but I saw it, I felt it, I experienced it. I was more reactive than responsive. And then at some point in time, you become a conscious adult where you say, oh, okay, I see all that, but I'm going to start thinking differently, feeling differently, making different choices. But then you recognize that you can do that, but it's still going to take time. Because just like your early childhood and teenage years was the result of the momentum of your past karma kind of washing over you, like when you're out at sea or you're in the ocean and you can't really control the waves as they push you around. Well, when you're an adult, you can do that a little bit better. You're still going to get knocked over every now and then, and you're still going to feel the push and the surge of the waves. But once you become a conscious adult, you're able to look towards land and recognize you can start swimming towards land, or you can start stumbling towards land while you still get knocked over by your past momentum of your karmas. But eventually, if you persist, you make it to land and you can stand up, and the waves of your karma are not necessarily so influential on you anymore. And then you're able to start practicing meditation well, yoga well, because you're not being constantly pulled out to sea by your desires and your attachments and your aversions. And you're not having to define yourself as a personality anymore. And that's often an issue that people have, is that they really, when they begin practicing meditation and yoga, what they really want is for who they are as a personality to be a superpowered version of who they are. They don't recognize that the personality is, in a way, what kind of got them into this mess in the first place. The I maker, the ahamkara. And the ahamkara, the I maker, is a little bit more cosmic than just our human personality, but it's the idea of being an individual. And when you're focused on constantly reaffirming your own individuality, well, you just continue to perpetuate a state of ignorance. You continue to perpetuate something for karma to attach to. And when we read stories of gurus and yogis and how the guru asks things of the yogis, which the yogi really doesn't want to do. And there's this emphasis put towards obedience towards the guru, towards the teacher. Well, in an ideal situation, what the guru is doing is aiming to break the student's attachment to their ephemeral, phenomenal sense of I. That's the ideal. Now, in our world, we can have people who abuse that, and so we have to be cautious. But in wisdom traditions, when ego personality issues are challenged by a teacher, a mentor, or a preceptor, it's usually for very good reason. So as we become more conscious, we might also find that we have to challenge our own attachment to our ego identification and to the way we think things should be, and focus on, well, what is the ideal way to behave? What is the ideal way to live? That isn't really concerned with these ego needs or these superficial needs to define oneself through a personality. Personalities come and go. And in yoga, we're not so concerned with the personality. We're concerned with realizing the animating energy, spirit, or consciousness that made the personality perceptible in the first place. Now, beyond all of this, let's think about time as well. In this story with the Sleepless Saint says, well, don't you see, my dear boy, that God is eternity itself? To assume that one can fully know him by 45 years of meditation is rather a preposterous expectation. Babaji assures us, however, that even a little meditation saves one from dire fear of death and after-death states. Do not fix your spiritual ideal on a small mountain, but hitch it to the star of unqualified divine attainment, and if you work hard, you will get there. And this reminds me of a sutra from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I know you've heard me talk about this before. It's one of my favorite sutras from Chapter 1, Sutra 14. Satu dirga kala narantarya satkara sevito dridha bhumihi. And this sutra essentially means that our practice has firm ground when it's been attended to for a long time, without interruption and with devotion to truth. Dirga kala, long time. Rantarya, without interruption. Satkara, with devotion and respect. Sevito, persistence in effort. And dridha bhumi, the ground or the plane, being established on firm ground. And the Sleepless Saint expresses this as he talks about how he meditated for many years, 4 decades at least, building this effort, this firm foundation. And he did so with devotion and respect and without interruption. And again, you have to approach this intelligently for yourself. What can you do? What time can you set aside so that you can practice with devotion and respect and without interruption? And again, you want to be honest with yourself about it. If you can't do it for more than a half hour, that's okay. But if you can do it for a half an hour, make sure you make the most of that time. If you're able to meditate or study different times throughout the day, but you can do it with focus, with devotion, that's wonderful. If you're a busy person, you run a business, you're running a family, you have different responsibilities and so on, you have to attend to those responsibilities because those are an expression of divinity as well. And you can do so with attention and with devotion, and that helps. And allow yourself to do that. But begin to really make the most of your time in meditation and spiritual study. Give it the attention that you can, and you want to challenge yourself from time to time. You can expand your time in study and meditation as the years go by. But if in reality you can only meditate for 30 or 45 minutes well before you start getting sleepy or distracted or thinking about other things, well, just do it for that amount of time and make the most of the time that you are able to give your attention to the process. And then attend to your life. Do the things that you need to do. And maybe you can't even sit for that long. Maybe it's just 10 minutes. Well, taking at least 10 minutes every day to focus on what is important to you spiritually, if you do it with a full heart and you do it every day, that accumulates. And in time, that creates a greater sense of sattva. We've used that term already, the sense of light and clarity. And in time, it makes it easier for you to naturally increase your practice. And if you even just practice for 10 minutes every day with this attention and devotion, what you'll find is as that light increases, as the years go by, you will naturally want to practice longer, you'll be more interested in it, and you'll be more successful at it. Again, if you let it happen naturally. Now you need to have the discipline to at least try, but once you have the discipline to try, you start making the effort. Then from there, you surrender, you relax, and you let it happen naturally. And then, as the years go by, your body, your field of consciousness, your nervous system will have a greater capacity to process this amplified energy. It becomes more natural to you. You become naturally more focused and purposeful in regards to what you want to accomplish, because you see that wherever you put your attention, that's what grows. And you recognize where you don't want to put your attention. You recognize what you don't necessarily want to grow anymore, that you don't need anymore, that you've outgrown. And this is a natural process. So as you meditate, as you study spiritual or sacred philosophy, and as you apply that to your life, remember, do it with intention and focus. And then let the process grow naturally from that intention and focus. And be patient and recognize, as the Sleepless Saint said, that to assume that one can fully know him, or divinity, God, by 45 years of meditation is rather a preposterous expectation. And remember that even a little meditation saves one from the dire fear of death and after-death states. So don't fix your spiritual ideal on a small mountain, but hitch it to the star of unqualified divine attainment. And if you work hard, as the Sleepless Saint has said, you will get there.